Kenya is in turmoil as President William Ruto condemns the storming of parliament, branding it a grave threat to national security. Will order be restored? Thousands of demonstrators, angered by tax increases, marched on the capital, Nairobi. What sparked such widespread unrest? Protesters broke into the parliament chamber, leading to violent clashes where several people were shot dead. This day marks the deadliest in recent protests and the most direct assault on Kenya's government in decades. What drove the protesters to such extremes? Protesters finally breached parliament after numerous attempts, ransacking the building and setting parts of it on fire. In a dramatic turn, lawmakers who voted to raise taxes fled through underground tunnels as police used tear gas, water cannons, and live ammunition, resulting in multiple deaths and dozens of injuries. Is the government's response proportionate, or is it fueling the fire? In a national address, President Ruto vowed a robust response to the day's violent events but remained silent on the finance bill that ignited the outrage. What does this mean for Kenya's future? Young protesters argue that tax hikes will cripple them economically by increasing the cost of essential goods and services. Although the government scrapped several planned increases, including those on basic foodstuffs like bread and oil, the concessions failed to quell the anger. Are the protesters' demands justified? Many protesters feel betrayed, stating that the government should reduce spending to address the €2.5 billion deficit rather than burdening citizens with higher taxes. They express regret over electing Ruto and vow to reject the finance bill outright. How will this political turmoil affect Kenya's stability?
Bottom-up economic transformation agenda, the basis upon which we were elected in the democratic elections of the year 2022. We have achieved significant progress in increasing food production by reducing the cost of farm inputs, thereby lowering the cost of food.
Felix Ming, reporting from Nairobi, describes how the protests brought the city to a standstill with shops closed and roads barricaded. The violence was personal for some, including a policeman mourning his brother, a protester killed by the very force he served. How deep is the division within Kenyan society? Protesters managed to set fire to part of the parliament building, quickly extinguished by staff, while lawmakers fled through underground tunnels. The destruction extended to police vehicles in several establishments, highlighting the intensity of the public's anger. Can Kenya recover from such widespread chaos? DB's Edith Kimani, reporting from Berlin, highlights that these protests are part of a larger wave of dissent. Why are young Kenyans so determined to be heard? The protests, sparked by legislation on tax collection and government spending, reflect deep dissatisfaction with the economic burden placed on the youth. Will their voices lead to meaningful change? Despite President Ruto's previous assurances against internet shutdowns, reports indicate disrupted services, raising concerns about government censorship. Is this a sign of escalating authoritarianism? Kimani points out that this government tactic is rare but not unprecedented in Africa. How will this impact the protest movement? National and international reactions have varied, with some leaders calling for calm, while others support the protesters' demands. Will external pressure influence Kenya's government? The protests have seen a resurgence in opposition, with lawyers, doctors, and religious leaders offering support to those affected by the violence. Are these protests the beginning of a broader movement for change? As young Kenyans, who make up 60% of the population, continue to protest, the government appears tone deaf to their plight. Will the youth's determination force the government to listen? Previous financial legislation under Ruto's government faced similar backlash, but the current protests show a resolve not seen before. How will this standoff resolve? Looking ahead, the protests are expected to escalate, with plans to occupy police stations and shut down the capital on Thursday. How will the government respond to these escalating actions? President Ruto has announced a press briefing, leading to speculation about possible state emergency declarations. Will this address the protesters' concerns or further inflame tensions? Kenya stands at a crossroads. Will President Ruto heed the protesters' demands, or will the country see increased unrest? Stay tuned as this story develops, with the potential for far-reaching consequences for Kenya's democracy and future.